back when I was in high school, I took a couple of extra gym classes. I wasn't the smartest kid, so I would often use my elective credits to just take as many easy classes as I could, and gym was the easiest one. One of the gym classes that I was in was during my second period of the day. It was spring semester, but I remember it was early on and there was still a lot of snow on the ground. So for the entire week for this class, we took a field trip to a nearby bowling alley. We would go there every day, and the bowling place was less than a mile away from the school, so it was really quick and easy for us to go there every day and return before our next class. I think the school must have had some sort of deal with the bowling alley though, because when we got there and went inside, we saw that it was not all that nice. It just looked really old and outdated, and they didn't really have anything other than bowling lanes, like no food and no arcade games. It was basically just bowling. The place also had a smell that you get when you enter really old buildings. I remember the other kids in the class would make jokes about the place. But for me personally, I knew it wasn't the nicest place, but it was still a working bowling alley, and I felt lucky to bowl for free during school hours, and I think everyone else felt the same. At the beginning of that week, the teacher taught us a few things about bowling, and then basically let us bowl for the rest of the week. Each day we would bowl 3 games in smaller groups, so all the lanes were filled out, and it would take up most of the class period. On the last day of the week that we were there, which was Friday, my group got done with our games early. The group was me and 4 other people, and one of the people in my group was my good friend Jake. When we were done, Jake and I were talking and we wandered off just a bit. We walked towards the back of the bowling alley on the side where there was a walkway. It was on the very far side of the bowling alley leading to the end of the lanes. We walked down to a spot with a door where you could access behind the bowling lanes for maintenance and repair and things like that. The door was already open a crack, and out of curiosity I looked inside. It was pretty interesting to see the back area behind the bowling lanes. I was amazed at what I was seeing, but after only a few seconds, my eyes were drawn to something else that was back there. I saw just about 10 feet away around a little corner, there was a man halfway peeking around. He had really long hair and a long beard. At first, I wasn't sure if he worked there or something, but the way he was laying on the floor and wearing baggy old clothes made me think that he didn't. Jake noticed him, and at about the same time I did, started to walk away. It creeped me out and I turned to leave as well. Just then, I was tapped on the shoulder by someone who worked there. It startled me, and as I turned around, they asked what Jake and I were doing. We alerted them that there was a man behind the lanes, and he seemed like a homeless guy. They told us that we were not supposed to be back there and we had to leave. Then they said that there was nobody back there at all. We watched as the guy who worked there went behind the lanes to look around. When he looked though, the old homeless guy wasn't there. I watched him walk all the way up and down and look behind the corner where he had been, and I just didn't understand it. He had been there for sure, and there were no other doors to leave. The guy who worked there then went back over to us and told us to leave. I remember he then went over and talked with our teacher, and our whole class had to go back to the school. I never did go back to that bowling alley, and every time I think about it, I wonder what exactly happened that day. For some background on this story, I'm a 25-year-old female, and I'm an avid bowler. I used to be in a bowling league, but over the last few years, I've just bowled for fun with my friends, and even by myself. About a year ago, I was at a bowling alley not far from my apartment with my best friend Danielle. We bowl together sometimes, and on this night we bowled 4 games and we're on to our 5th. We had lost track of the time a bit, and Danielle realized that she had to leave. Once she left, I decided to stay and bowl for the both of us to finish the game because I enjoyed it. It was probably about 9 p.m. by this time, and the bowling alley was not too busy. I kept on bowling, and as I was almost done, I noticed a man coming over to the lane that I was at. He approached me and then complimented me on my bowling skills. Right away, the man just seemed really creepy. The way he was staring at me was just very off-putting. He mentioned he had been watching me bowl and wanted to know how I got so good at it. I very briefly talked to him and then told him that I had better finish. He asked me why I was bowling all by myself and then asked to join me, but I told him no thanks, I was almost done, and then I had to be getting home. The man seemed disappointed and then walked away. I finished bowling and was done about 10 minutes later, As I was going to leave, I noticed that the same man that had talked to me before was just kind of standing by the doorway looking around. I had a bad feeling, so I walked over to the other end of the bowling alley. I looked around for an exit, and luckily they had a back door which not many people used, so I decided to exit there. I was able to make it to my car without the man following me or anything like that. Overall, the guy just gave me a really bad feeling and seemed like a creep, but beyond that, I forgot all about the experience. However, several months later, I happened to be watching the news, which is something that I rarely do. I was kind of half paying attention and half on my phone, when suddenly I noticed a photo of a man on the screen. It struck me when I saw it, and I recognized it to be the man from the bowling alley. I learned on the news that he had been caught after he followed a woman home and attempted to break into her house. I got the chills as I heard this, and realized that quite possibly he was planning to do the same to me that night at the bowling alley. I'm really glad I left out the back door instead of the front. This happened about 5 years ago. I was on a road trip with my friend Justin. We were traveling back home from a convention in a city about 8 hours away from the city where we lived. We drove home, but about halfway through the trip, with about 4 hours left to go, a really bad snowstorm started to hit. With it being nighttime, we decided to find a hotel and be safe, instead of trying to power through it. It was only about 7 p.m. when we checked into the closest decent hotel that we could find. And once we were there, Justin suggested that we see if there was anything to do close by. And when I say close by, I mean within just about a walking distance, because we didn't want to have to drive out in that weather. When we looked, we saw that there was a bowling alley right down the street. We both left out into the blizzard to go to the bowling alley. It seemed like a fun thing to do for a few hours while we were stranded in the city for the night. When we arrived at the bowling alley, we couldn't tell if it was open or not. There weren't really many cars in the parking lot or visible lights on, but we figured not many people were there due to the snowstorm. Justin tried the door, and sure enough it was unlocked, so we went inside to check it out. As soon as we got inside, we could see that it wasn't the nicest of bowling alleys. It seemed sort of old and nobody else was there at all. Some of the lights were on and others were off. It was an eerie feeling overall. We looked to the counter, but nobody was behind it. The place had to be closed, but why was the door left unlocked? We wandered around a little bit out of curiosity. The place definitely seemed to be closed, so we figured we should probably just leave. But then we heard some noise coming from a back room behind the counter. I thought maybe someone was working after all. I walked over to the counter to see if there was anybody there. But as I got closer, I noticed there was a door behind that was open leading to another room. I looked in and saw inside the room around the corner there were about 5 men who were sitting at a table. They looked really surprised to see me. One of them started to get up. None of the men appeared to work at the bowling alley, and I got a strong urge to leave. I kind of backed away, and then I quickly walked over to Justin and said, "Let's go." He followed, and we both left the building at a rather fast pace. We ran in the snow all the way back to our hotel and got inside. We didn't know who those men were or what they were doing, but the next days we were finally able to get back on the road and drive home. We noticed a car seemed to be following us. No matter what we did, the car would appear behind us. At times, we would seem to lose it, and we wouldn't see it for a while, but it would always return. We got home safely, but the next day as I was driving, I noticed that same car following me as well. It followed me around that day, but after that day, I never saw it again, and beyond that, nothing else happened. I just wonder sometimes if those two things were linked, and who it was who followed us. Six years ago, I worked as a delivery driver for Domino's. For me, it was a pretty easy job to just drive around town delivering pizzas, Plus, I made some pretty good tips. I lived in the city, so I would never have to drive all that far. This was also my main way of earning extra money during my summers home from college, and I would generally work some pretty late nights. One night, I remember that it was a Friday, which are always really busy. I was driving all over the place around town for hours, until finally it started to quiet down after midnight. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, we got another order for a delivery that I took. It was 1 cheese pizza and an order of cheesy bread, and I put it in my car and started driving. Once I got closer to the location, I realized that it was not for a house, but a business. It was still in the city, but a more industrial side of town where there appeared to be a bunch of warehouses. I arrived at the address and saw that the special instructions on the order said that they wanted it delivered to the back door in the alley. I drove around back to find a dark alley with some dumpsters and then a small set of concrete stairs that seemed to lead to the building. I drove around back to find a dark alley with some dumpsters and then a small set of concrete stairs that led to a back door of the building. I'm not going to lie, it was a creepy scene with no other cars or people there in a back alley in the middle of the night. I had a job to do though, and I got out of my car and walked up the steps to the back door. I knocked on the door and waited there for a minute, but nobody answered. It was extremely quiet, and nobody else seemed to be around at all. I was beginning to wonder if I was at the correct building, so I looked around for the address to make sure. But just then, I heard a noise come from about 10 feet away from me. I looked and saw a man come from behind a dumpster that was sitting on the other side of the stairs that I was on. He was wearing sunglasses even though it was night, and started walking towards me. Based on the way he was walking, it didn't seem good, and I backed away from my car. Then, I saw another man come out from behind the other side of my car. He was also in sunglasses, but other than that, I couldn't really give a good description. They both were coming towards me at a pretty fast-paced walk. I knew I wouldn't be able to get to my car, so I jumped over the railing of the stairs to the ground below, which was only about 5 feet. I then ran out of the alley as fast as I could. I could hear the men chasing after me as I did, and it sounded like there was a third person among them running as well. I was somehow able to outrun them to the end of the alley, and once I was there, I turned for the street and tried to run to an area where there was more people. I panicked and ran into the middle of the road, where a car was coming and started honking at me. I got out of the way just in time and was lucky enough to get to the other side of the street. The men stopped from chasing me and were still at the other side. From there, I called my boss and told him what happened. I made my way to a nearby convenience store and waited. It ended up being a big deal, as the building that I was instructed to deliver the pizza to had not actually ordered the pizza, meaning whoever lured me there was possibly setting me up to get robbed or something like that. The police were called, and I quit the job shortly after. This happened about a year ago. It was a Friday night, and I was hanging out with my girlfriend at her place, and we were trying to decide what movie we were going to watch. We ordered Domino's, some pasta and a pepperoni pizza, and I offered to go pick it up. There was a Domino's roughly 5 minutes away, so it wasn't a big deal for me to drive over and get it, and then I wouldn't have to spend money on a tip. When the food said it was done, I got in my car and left. I got to the small restaurant, which by this time was roughly 11 p.m. and was pretty quiet. I parked in the small parking lot beside the restaurant and walked inside. There was nobody at the counter as I walked in, so I stood there and waited. After a few seconds, I saw a woman briefly come out from the kitchen area and said she would be right with me in a moment. Then she disappeared again away from the counter. I said that was fine, and I stood there waiting. I looked around the small lobby. I wasn't in a big hurry or anything, so I didn't mind, and I knew that it being a Friday night, they were probably really busy with deliveries. Then, as I looked behind me at the window going outside, I saw a man who had his face pressed up against the glass window of the store, looking right at me. He had a scraggly beard and appeared to be in his 30s. He was just staring at me with a somewhat angry look on his face. I didn't know what to do and just turned back around. I was expecting him to come inside the store, but he never did. I faced the counter and then looked over my shoulder again to see that he was still there and not moving. Finally, the woman came back and asked me for my name of the order. As she did, she seemed to see the man in the window and asked who he was. I said I didn't know and I found it strange. She kind of laughed it off with a nervous and awkward laugh, Then I told her my name, and she said she would go get my order. As she was getting it, I could see movement out of the corner of my eye. I saw the man suddenly dart away from the window and run away. I figured he was just some crazy guy, and I was glad that he was gone. A minute or so later, the woman came back with my order, and I took the boxes and left Domino's. I walked to the parking lot on the side where my car was, and saw that the weird guy from the window was now standing by my car. I felt really awkward now because this man seemed to be a little crazy, and I knew I'd have to walk right past him. I was also concerned with him being right next to my car. I slowly walked over, and the man looked at me and smiled as I did. He didn't come closer to me though, which was a relief. Eventually, I was able to make it to my driver's door and get inside. I said goodnight to the man and drove away. He just stood there smiling at me. I began driving the 5-minute or so drive back home, but as I pulled onto a busier road less than a mile later, my car suddenly didn't feel right. The front wheel seemed like it was coming right off. I stopped the car on the side of the road and got out. I walked over and looked to see that all of the lug nuts on my right front wheel were loosened almost all the way, and the wheel of the car was starting to come off. I couldn't believe it. I immediately thought back to the man. I was kind of more out in the middle of nowhere now and was driving away from the businesses in town. I got up my phone and quickly called my girlfriend. I got back inside my car then and waited for her. Luckily, she could come and pick me up with her car, and she arrived just a couple of short minutes later, and we went over to get a wrench. We were gone for only about 10 minutes, but when we got back, my driver's window was smashed. At that point, we called the police. They came out to the area and we told them the whole story. I believe that man I saw was trying to hurt me, and he returned to my car and smashed the window after he realized I was gone. I'm grateful that I narrowly missed him. A few years ago, I worked at Domino's Pizza. I worked there for roughly 1 year, and for the most part, I liked it. One time, though, I was working a night shift like I often did. It was sorta busy, and we would typically get a lot of phone calls for pizza orders, and I would answer them a lot of the times. On this night, we got another phone call at about 10 p.m. I answered it, but on the other end, I didn't hear anything at all. I said hello several times, but there was just silence. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, I heard on the other end a loud and really creepy sounding laugh. I said hello one more time, and when I did, the laugh only seemed to get louder. It gave me the creeps, and I hung up on them. I kept working and answered several more calls over the next few hours, until after midnight, I got another call which was the same creepy laugh. I asked who it was, but of course they didn't answer. This time, I kept them on for a little bit longer, but all they would do is laugh. Eventually, I hung up on them again, and that was the last call I got that night. Over the next few days, though, it started happening more often. It happened about 5 times, and I told my coworkers about it. They hadn't experienced anything like it, and it would only seem to happen when I answered the phone. I was starting to get really annoyed and also seriously creeped out by these calls that kept happening. The person on the other end of the phone was usually laughing, but sometimes there would be a whisper which I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then they started just doing other random things like not talking at all or hanging up right away. I figured it was just a stupid prank, but I couldn't help but be a little bit scared. Then things got even worse. One night, when I was at home, I received a call, and when I answered it, I heard that same creepy laughing. I had no idea how they got my number, because it had only happened at work. I asked who it was once again, but all I heard was the same old laughing. Then they started whispering once again, and I couldn't make it out at all. Eventually, they hung up on me. I was really creeped out now and didn't know what to do. I was home by myself, so that made me worry even more. I ended up calling my best friend and telling her all about it. She came over that night, but there were no more calls. The next night, I got the last call that I ever received from that person. It was more hysterical laughing, and it got louder and louder, until finally, there was a scream at the other end of the phone, and they hung up. This time, I was the most creeped out that I had ever been, and once again, my best friend came over. She spent the next few nights at my place. However, that was the last call that I ever got from the number, and they never called me again at work or at home. I sometimes wonder who it was and why they were calling me. Last year, my husband and I decided to clean out our attic, which was in our 2-story home. It was long overdue, and none of us had been up there in over a year. The attic wasn't very big, and neither of us used it. However, we did have some things up there that had been stored up there for years. We finally decided that the space could be put to better use. We both went up there one Saturday morning and looked inside. There were a few boxes and old pieces of furniture. It really wasn't that bad. We grabbed a couple of boxes and brought them down. I asked my husband to go through one of the boxes because it was mainly his things in there. Then I went back up to get some more. When I went back up, I got a couple more boxes, but as I was up there, I thought that I heard a noise come from the back corner of the attic. I looked, but I saw nothing. Nevertheless, I was pretty freaked out and ran back downstairs. My husband asked me what the problem was, and I told him I heard a noise up there. We both decided to go back up together and investigate. When we got up there, everything seemed normal, and I walked over to the corner where I had heard the noise. My husband followed to look, but just then, we both heard a noise from directly behind us where the door was. We turned around at the same time to see the door to the attic being slammed shut. It was so fast I didn't see who had shut the door, but it was now closed. My husband and I both looked at each other in shock. "Who just did that?" he asked. He then walked over to the door to open it, but the doorknob had been broken off from the inside. We both tried to get out, but couldn't seem to open the door with no knob on it. We heard some movement throughout the rest of our house as we did. It was very creepy, and luckily we did have our phones on us, so I decided to call the police. My husband then put a large piece of furniture in front of the door, so whoever was in our house could at least not get back in the attic where we were. I explained the situation to the police, and they said they would arrive shortly. We waited and looked out our window as well as listened to hear for more noises in the rest of our house. We didn't really hear anything more though as we waited. We looked around the attic, but didn't see any evidence to indicate that someone had been up there. Several minutes later, we saw out the window the police arriving in our driveway, and we waved out to them. They made their way into the house and up to the attic when they opened the door for us. They told us whoever had been in our house was now gone. Our back door had been left open, and they didn't find anybody inside. Whoever it was didn't appear to take anything or mess up the house at all, which was a little bit surprising to me. We were able to finish cleaning out the attic and replace the doorknob in the days after. We didn't know how the person got into our attic in the first place or what they wanted, but I also found it creepy how they knew to remove the doorknob so we couldn't get out. This story happened last spring. I was doing some spring cleaning in my house like I did every year. As soon as the weather would get warm, I would organize through things and then have a big yard sale. I went through many things around the house and then took out several boxes of things we were selling outside because it was such a nice day out. Once we had everything outside, we would organize it and decide how much we would charge for it at our yard sale. I was cleaning by myself on this day and went through quite a few things and had a decent number of boxes outside by the time I had been cleaning for a few hours. When I was on my way out to the driveway to put some more things out, I saw a man walking up my driveway and towards my garage. We had a detached garage which was open at the time, and I didn't recognize this man at all. It was really unusual for something like this to happen, and I called out to the man and asked him what he was doing. But he didn't answer me. He just kept walking until he was inside of my garage. Now I was a little bit worried, because we had tools and other things in there he could steal, or even use as a weapon. Still, I decided to follow the man inside and hope that he didn't have any bad intentions. Maybe he just thought he was at another house or something. I walked over to the garage and went inside. When I got inside, I couldn't find him. I walked all around, which wasn't that big, just a single-car garage, and we didn't have a car in there at the time. I walked around it twice, but never saw the man. Other than the large garage door in front, We only had one other door in the back of the garage, but it was covered at the time by our old trash cans. I just didn't see how on earth the man could go and just seemingly disappear like that. I was a little bit spooked, and then went back and decided to bring the boxes just inside my house. I organized the rest of the things as usual, and on the next day set up for our yard sale. I planned to have part of the sale in our garage and the rest in our driveway. As I was setting up things in the garage, I couldn't help but feel a little creeped out by remembering the man who seemingly vanished in there the day before. The next day, we held our yard sale. I sat about midway down the driveway at a table and chair with a little cash register, and before long, people started to show up. Things were going well until one of the shoppers came up to me. She told me that there was a creepy man hiding in a garbage can in the garage. I decided to go over and look. I felt more brave with a few people being around, and when I got to the garbage can in the garage, I opened it up and saw the same man from before. He didn't look at me, but aggressively jumped out and sprinted away. Everyone seemed really surprised at what they had seen. I'm really glad the man didn't cause any major problems, but it's really creepy to think how he was likely in my garage for several days. Several years back, I was cleaning out my house. I was renting a house for a year, and the year was almost up. I wasn't going to be living there the next year, so it was time for me to start cleaning out and moving my stuff to my next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but it was plenty of space for just me. I lived there by myself, and I had just finished cleaning out the living room, other than some basic furniture, and I had moved on to clean the kitchen. There were quite a few cabinets, so many that I didn't use a good number of them. I was looking through some of the ones that I didn't use to make sure that there was nothing I had in them. One of them I opened up, and I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't think it was mine, but when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that I could barely see. The cabinet was in the corner, sort of by the sink, and halfway blocked by the stove. I thought it was just another pipe, but it just looked a little different to me. I got inside and had to crawl inside the cabinet, which was pretty large. Once I got inside, I saw there was a small trap door to the side leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You had to be completely inside in order to see the detail of it, and I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I got farther inside, I was horrified. I saw that there was food, as well as several blankets as if someone had been living inside of there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was gone. I tried to make sense of it and figure out how long the person had been there and how I didn't know about it. I was gone from the house a lot with work and other stuff, but I didn't know how it was possible for someone to live in there without me knowing. I continued cleaning until it got pretty late, and the next day after work I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in my house, and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside, then I pulled the lever open just like I had the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement and then saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door back shut on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car and then called the police. I was so scared that I started driving away as well. I told the police the whole situation, and they came to my house a short time later to find that whoever had been there was now gone. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I really don't know how long the person was living in my secret room, but thankfully it never gave me a problem. This happened last summer during a road trip. I was going out west to California with my friend Ray to go to LA and visit a friend of ours from high school who lived out there. We had been driving for almost 2 days at this point and had just made it into California. We had stopped at many places along the way for food, hotels, and lots of cool sights to see. was about 6 p.m. at this time, and we had stopped in a town that had almost everything, like stores and restaurants. We stopped at a Target there to get some things. I had been driving for the last few hours, and as we got out of the car, I felt my pocket for my phone, and when I did, I realized it wasn't there. I expected it to have fallen out of my pocket on the seat or between the seat, but I couldn't find it there when I looked. I began to look all around the car, and I couldn't seem to find it anywhere. Ray stopped to help me look, and before long we were turning the car upside down looking for my phone. I hadn't remembered using it in a while, mostly because I had been driving and Ray had been looking up stuff on his phone. I started to panic because we had stopped at so many places and I had no idea where it was. I knew I had used my phone earlier that day, but I couldn't remember exactly what time. We had a lot of stuff in our car, so we got back inside and Ray decided to call my phone, hoping that it was still hidden somewhere. We shut the doors so it would be quiet, and as Ray called me, we listened closely for a ring to come from somewhere inside the car. As the call was made, my heart dropped as I didn't hear any sound at all coming from inside the car. I feared the worst, but Ray said maybe my phone was just dead and that's why it wasn't ringing. But just then, something unexpected happened. Someone answered my phone. We were so shocked that we didn't know what to do or say for a second. Ray said hello eventually, but there was silence on the other end. Ray explained that I had lost my phone, and whoever this was who had answered it had my phone. Still, there was no response. Then, an almost whispered voice on the other end said, "I can see you." We thought this had to be a prank, but also didn't really know how to respond to this. The voice once again said that they could see us. Then they told us how we were sitting in the Target parking lot and described the kind of car that we were in. Suddenly, we both got very creeped out. We asked who this was, but they didn't answer. I asked if I could please have my phone back, but after that, whoever was on the other end hung up on us. Ray and I were both really creeped out, and it was pretty obvious at this point I wasn't going to get my phone back, so we both decided to just leave and we'd stop someplace else. We drove away, but about a half hour later, as we were driving down the road, Ray got a call on his phone. It said it was from me, and when he answered it, he put the phone on speaker. We heard the same voice from before on the phone again, and they said once more that they could see us and then hung up before we had a chance to respond. We kept driving and didn't stop for about another hour. We were looking over our shoulders for the rest of the day, but nothing else strange like that ended up happening. I ended up getting a new cell phone once we got to LA, because my other one was getting kind of old anyways. But there's more to the story. About a month later, after we had returned from California and I was back home, I got a package in the mail. Inside of it was my old phone with a piece of paper attached to it which read, "I don't need this anymore. Thanks for the information." This was really creepy. How did they know my address? And how did they know where Ray and I were driving? I had so many questions and was kind of worried for a few weeks after that, but nothing else ever happened since. Maybe it was just some sort of a prank, but either way, it was pretty creepy. A couple of months ago, I had an experience where I lost my phone. It was during one night when I was at the grocery store like any other. I left my car to go into the store, but about 10 minutes later, when I wanted to use my phone, I realized that it wasn't in my pocket. I realized I had probably forgot it in the car where I had it earlier, so I walked out to the car, but when I did, I couldn't find it. My fear was that my phone fell out of my pocket as I left the car, and someone else took it, because it wasn't anywhere on the ground that I could see. I went home that night and decided to use the Find My iPhone app that I had on my iPad. This was an app that would allow me to see the location of my iPhone if it was lost. I opened up the app to find the location of my phone, but when it showed the location that it was at, it surprised me. It appeared that the phone was at my house. I was so confused because I knew I had my phone in my car earlier, but when I got to the grocery store, I suddenly didn't have it. I really didn't think my phone was in my house, but I decided to look around because according to my Find My iPhone app, it was at my house. After searching all over the place in every possible location I could think of, I determined that it definitely wasn't there. I guess the Find My iPhone app must have been broken or something, but the next day, I decided to try it again. This time when I went on it though, It showed my iPhone was on the other side of town. It was about 15 miles away and wasn't even near the grocery store that I had originally thought I had lost it at. This was even more confusing to me now. I thought about driving to the location, but I wanted to wait until my friend could go with me. I could still message on my iPad, so I asked my friend Robbie to go with me, and he said he could when he was done with work that night. Several hours later, at about 6 p.m., I was in my living room when I heard the sound of my back door rattling. It sounded like someone was trying to get inside, and I thought maybe it was Robbie, so I walked over to the door. But as soon as I got a look at the back door, I saw a figure of a man much larger than Robbie, and I did not recognize who it was. I didn't get a good look at his face at all, and I darted back out of view of my back door and ran into my bedroom. I took my iPad in there, and I heard whoever was there keep trying to open the door. Then the noise stopped, and it got quiet until I started to hear noises from a back window. I decided to call the police from my iPad and tell them that there was an attempted break-in at my house. I stayed hidden in my bedroom as I waited for the police to arrive. As I was on my iPad, I switched apps to message Robbie what was happening. When I passed the Find My iPhone app, I accidentally opened it back up, and when I did, I saw that my iPhone was now showing that it was back at my house again. That's when my brain connected the dots, and I realized whoever was trying to break into my house must have had my phone. The house got silent again for a while, and eventually the police arrived. When they did, I told them everything I knew. We tracked my iPhone once more to a different location, but this location turned out to just be on the side of a random road, not really near any buildings. I was able to get my phone back, but I never figured out who took it. I've always been an avid hiker and have gone on literally hundreds of different hiking trails over the last several years. I've explored just about every trail and good place to hike near where I live, and whenever I travel, the first thing I do is look for good trails as well. I really enjoy being out in nature whenever I can, and it makes me feel really good and relaxes me. Anyways, the story I'm telling you occurred about 2 years ago now. I went to a trail near a wooded area which was about 15 minutes away from where I live, really out in the wilderness. There was a hiking path in the area, but I wanted to go off the path a little bit because I had been on the hiking path before. There was some great land in the area, and even though there wasn't an official path in this one spot, there was plenty of space to walk around, and it was kind of an unofficial path. I walked down that ways for a good 30 minutes or so, but then the terrain started to get really rough, and after a while, I wasn't really equipped for it with the shoes that I had on, so I turned back to return to my car. I got back and drove all the way home before realizing that I didn't have my phone on me. I got that terrible feeling you get when you lose your phone, and after looking around in my car, I realized I hadn't remembered using my phone since I had been way out in the woods. I realized that I knew exactly where it probably was. Well, not the exact location, but an estimated area of where it would be. I realized it likely fell out of my pocket as I walked over the rough terrain in the woods. By now it had gotten dark out, and I was a little bit hesitant to go back out there, but I had been out in the woods at night before, and I wasn't scared at all. I hadn't seen anyone else in the park that day either, so I wasn't too concerned anyone would take my phone or anything like that. Like most people, I used my phone for everything, so even though it was nighttime, I decided to drive back and quickly go out to get my phone. I was very confident I would find it, and as I got there and set out to the path again, I couldn't help but feel slightly creeped out entering the woods at night all by myself. I walked on the path to the point that I had gone off of it earlier. I have always been really good with directions and landmarks, so I knew it was the same spot. Then I followed the little unofficial trail until the part with the bumpy terrain to where I expected my phone to be. And as I entered the area, I thought I heard a noise of a tree branch cracking in the distance, maybe 50 feet away. It caused me to pause in my tracks and go silent, but I heard nothing else. As I started to walk again, I heard more noises though. I thought it was some type of animal and looked in the direction. I didn't see anything, and then heard the noise of walking in the distance again, but it sounded distinctly like a human the way the footsteps were. Still, I knew it was unlikely that anyone would be out here now. I nervously decided to call out hello on the slim chance there was another person out there, but I got no response. I wasn't sure what kind of animal it would be though. and as I slowly walked closer, suddenly I finally saw my phone on the ground. It was such a relief to finally see what I had been looking for. Now I could get out of the woods. I picked it up, and as I did, I started to hear the noises again coming towards me. I just couldn't tell what was making the noises. I looked all around, and finally off in the distance, I thought I saw what appeared to be a person ducked behind a tree. All I really saw was a leg for a second, and that was it, but I decided to get out of there as quickly as I could. I didn't want to run, so I started slowly walking, but it quickly turned into a fast walk, and as I heard noises behind me, I couldn't take it anymore and I turned it into a full sprint. I ran as fast as I could through the woods, hearing some noises behind me as I did. The noises weren't really that close, and I couldn't tell for sure if I was being followed or not, but I was not wasting a second in there longer than I had to. I had my phone, and I was just happy to get out of there. When I finally made it back to my car, I immediately started it up and left. I drove home, and once I got back, I finally was able to respond to some texts that I had gotten and things like that. As I was on my phone, I noticed that the camera app had been opened. I went on it and noticed some photos on my phone that I didn't recognize. There were several pictures taken on my phone during the time that it had been lost in the woods. One appeared to be of the sky, and another couple were of the ground that were blurry. Then I saw one that appeared to be a man, but it was really blurry. I couldn't make out any details of his face with how blurry it was or anything like that, but seeing those photos really gave me the creeps. That woods was really out there in kind of the middle of nowhere, and I can't believe anyone else was out there, much less who would have been on my phone. I'm quite certain whoever took those photos was the person out there in the woods with me. When I was 15, my recently divorced dad bought a townhouse in the nicer part of town. It was for him, my brother, and I to all live in. The townhouse was 3 stories, the first being an above-ground basement with a bathroom, bedroom, living space, and a patio. I was lucky to be given the basement as my bedroom, being the oldest child. I loved having my own space down there, and would sometimes fall asleep on the couch in the living area, only to wake up in the middle of the night with an odd feeling. This would happen every time I slept out there, and for some reason, the slightly cracked blinds on the patio door would always creep me out. Nobody really used the patio, but my dad would occasionally check to make sure the door was locked before going to sleep. As I got older, I would use this door to sneak out at night or smoke a little bit when my dad wasn't home, which led to him checking on it more often as it was unlocked sometimes. He grew suspicious about why I was going out there so much, so around the time I was 17, he installed a Ring camera on the patio without my knowledge. He ended up catching me and I got in trouble a few times. After I graduated high school and was getting ready to leave for college, I spent less and less time at my dad's as my mom's house was closer to my school, work, and friends. One night during this time, my dad sent me a video he had captured with the Ring camera on the patio captioned, "WTF, this is last night at 3 a.m. My heart dropped as I watched the video. There appeared to be a man in the video walk up to the patio door and stare in through the notorious crack in the blinds that was always there. The man didn't try the doorknob, but appeared to be holding something shiny and metallic in his hands. Whether it was a Zippo, knife, or whatever, I have no idea as the video is way too low quality to tell. The man seemed to be mumbling to himself while listening to some type of Christian rock music. The video really scared me, as I very well could have been sleeping in there clueless if this had been a different day or time. No other neighbors caught the man on their cameras, which makes me feel like it was more targeted, or this wasn't the first time he had visited my dad's house. The creepiest part is next to the patio is a window to my bedroom, which the Ring camera doesn't catch, where the man could have looked through it before, directly into my bed. All that besides, I've never stayed at my dad's since. Two years ago, I worked as a security guard at a warehouse. It was a temporary job for me as I needed a job for just a few months. This was a job that paid pretty decent and was also really easy for me. For the most part, I would just watch security cameras and patrol the area. Nothing ever really happened, and the only people I really talked to were just people who were expected at the building, like delivery drivers. I would check IDs and just let them in and out. But one night, as I was working, I was sitting in the room where the security cameras were displayed. It was kind of a control room of types, and suddenly I saw one of the areas that was prohibited outside the building. There appeared to be a man entering and walking in. I wasn't sure how he was able to get in, because there was a large barbed wire fence blocking it, and I had to do a double take, but I was sure of what I saw. I was really nervous, because I had never really dealt with anyone trying to break in before. I got up and made my way out of the room and down the stairs to the area. After I got down the stairs, I had to walk down a hallway, which led into a bigger room and then to the area outside where the barbed wire fence was. I had no idea how this man that I had seen on camera was able to make it over the barbed wire fence, but somehow he had. This wasn't a small fence either. It was about 20 feet tall. I looked to the area expecting to see the man, but I saw no one. The warehouse was always locked as well, so I knew he couldn't have gotten inside. I stepped outside and examined the entrance area of the building. I looked in every possible way the man could have gone, but there was really only two options. They were to leave and go back, or to enter the building, which was locked, and I saw no signs of forced entry. I was really confused, and even questioned if I had in fact seen someone on the security camera. I guessed whoever it was must have left, and it left me feeling sort of creeped out knowing that I was all alone in the building at night. I began to walk back to my control room and went up the stairs and down the hallway. As I did, I checked each locked door. When I was walking down the dark hallway, I suddenly felt a tap on my shoulder. Startled, I jumped back and turned around, but nobody was there. I literally started shaking and quickly went back to my control room and then locked the door. I then checked the security tape again. I replayed the tape and once again saw the man enter the restricted area outside like I had seen before. The man was kind of far away, and I couldn't really see any details on the tape other than just a figure of a man. I was very creeped out for the rest of the night. That was my scariest experience working there, and I quit shortly after. This was several years ago. At the time, I was living in a house all by myself. I had just recently bought it, and this was my first house. The house itself was relatively small, but it had a decent-sized yard in the back, and was also very affordable to me at the time. This story takes place several months after I moved in. Everything was going really well, until one day when I got up, it appeared as though someone had tried to break into my house. I had opened up the front door and saw that there were scratches and marks on it. And then when I went around to the back, I saw some marks on there as well. Then, several days later, a package was stolen off my front step. Now, I never saw or heard anything, but it was pretty scary still, and I decided that I would install a security camera to get to the bottom of what was happening. I purchased a very small security camera that I would be able to keep hidden near an area of my front door. I set it up in the morning and placed it behind one of the lights on my front porch. I positioned it so it showed my front door area. I was really impressed with the job that I did setting it up, because when I looked at it, it was completely hidden and I couldn't tell that it was there at all. After that, all I had to do was wait. Several days went by, and I hadn't heard or seen anything strange, but I decided to review the security footage and see. The camera would pick up any type of movement in my front door area. There were several times that I saw me entering the house, and a couple times of mail being delivered. But other than that, there was one time that it picked up at night that I didn't recognize. I was creeped out as I played the footage. What it showed was a man walk up to the front steps onto my porch. I didn't recognize him at all. As he got closer, I saw that he was wearing a ski mask over his face, and he wore all black clothes as well. He walked straight up to where the camera was and looked right at it as if he knew exactly where it was. He then lifted his mask just enough to show his mouth to reveal a wide, creepy smile on his face. After that, he waved and then turned around and walked away. I was horrified. How did he know exactly where I had installed the camera? It was as if he knew before he even walked up to the house. It made me realize there was a possibility he had been watching me install it. I went to the police after that, and they took my information down and saw the video. They told me to call them if anything else suspicious happened. I was on edge for a few days, and finally one night at about midnight, I heard a scratching coming from my back door this time. Unfortunately, I didn't have a camera set up to my back door, and I had a feeling whoever was there knew that. I got out my phone ready to call the police. Then I heard a bang come from the window next to my back door. I turned on all the lights and screamed that I had called the police. Then I actually called them. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. It was silenced the whole time that I waited for the police to show up. When they got there, they came inside and I spoke with them, but the man who tried to break in was long gone. Luckily, several days later, I received a call saying that the man had been caught several miles away for another attempted break-in. I'm glad the man was found because it was very stressful living there not knowing what would happen next. When I was in college, every year during spring semester, I would look forward to spring break. My freshman and sophomore year, I just went back home for the week and hung out with friends and family. But my junior year, me and my friend group from college all planned a trip to Florida for spring break. We were really excited and planned it several months in advance. When the time came, there was 6 of us total, and we flew to Miami, where the weather was much warmer than it was where we went to school in Michigan. Because there were 6 of us, we were all able to rent out an Airbnb with 4 bedrooms right near the city where there was lots to do within a walking distance. When we got there, it was immediately much warmer. Over the first few days, we all went around Miami to some beaches and restaurants and several bars in town. We went out a lot, and most nights we'd go to the bars nearby our Airbnb and then walk back. The bars were always really crowded and fun because of all the other people that were there for spring break, and with it just being Miami in general. One night, I was walking home by myself because I was really tired and the rest of my friends were still out. I decided to go back early because we were only staying about 5 blocks away. As I walked, the area slowly got quieter and quieter until I reached the property where we were staying, which was typically pretty quiet. The whole time I was walking, I heard footsteps behind me about 20 feet back. I never really stopped to look though because at first it seemed normal. But now that I was 90% of the way back and I was still hearing them, it was slightly concerning, but most likely just a coincidence. I decided to just ignore it and keep going back. Once I reached our place, the footsteps seemed to stop. I got inside and went straight to bed. The next day, however, I found myself in a similar situation. It was 10 p.m. and we were all out several blocks away once again, but at a different place this time. When we got there, I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I hadn't needed it to that point, but knew I would need it now, and I told my friends I would just walk back and get it really quick. It was only about a 10-minute walk, so it wasn't a huge deal at all. As I was walking though, I once again heard the noise of footsteps behind me. Once again, it wasn't strange until I got back and heard the same footsteps. This time, I looked behind me as I was a short ways from home. I saw a man who had his hood up and was looking straight at the ground. Obviously, I didn't recognize him and couldn't make out much details of his appearance other than he seemed a little sketchy to me. I kept going back and looked back once more to see the man sort of walk away shortly before I reached our place. I was relieved to see that and went inside and quickly got my wallet, then went back out with my friends. As I walked back, I was pretty scared to be followed again, and I walked at a fast pace until I got to a more busy area of town. I made it back to my friends safely, and we stayed out for a few hours, then all walked back together. When we were walking back, I didn't notice us being followed at all. Once we were back, I got ready for bed and went to my room that I was staying in. I turned off all the lights and went to sleep. The next thing I knew, I woke up to see that it was still dark outside. I didn't really think anything of it, because I would occasionally wake up for no reason in the middle of the night. I turned over to my other side to go back to sleep. But when I did, I noticed in the doorway of my room was a man. The man was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, but in the dark, I couldn't tell anything about him. I was looking at him for a solid 5 seconds before I let out a loud scream. The man then walked out of view of the doorway. Shortly after that, I heard my friends wake up in the other rooms. A few of them came into my room to see if I was okay. I told them what I had seen, and they all came into my room with me and we called the police. We told them that a man had somehow gotten into our place, and they said they would send an officer to our location. As we were still on the phone, we heard the door from downstairs slam shut. When the police came, the man was gone and they couldn't find him anywhere. We figured he left, and we didn't see him for the rest of our trip. It's a mystery to me, though, how he was able to get in. This is the story of my spring break vacation from about 4 years ago. I was in college, and we had an entire week off from classes for spring break, so me and my two friends Daniel and Joey decided to take a road trip to Nashville, Tennessee. The first parts of the drive went really well. All three of us had sort of old cars, but we decided to take my car because I was the only one with an SUV and had the most space. My car was relatively old, but for the first day of the trip, it ran great. But on the second day, when we had made it into Tennessee, we started driving through the mountains and my car started acting up. I heard my engine making some pretty weird sounds. We had plenty of gas, but the car seemed as if it was going to die. The unfortunate part was that it was nighttime and now the roads were getting really quiet. We also didn't get a very good signal up here at all. My car did eventually die, and we came to a stop on the side of the road. We were still about 2 hours away from our hotel. I tried starting the car back up, but had no luck in it. Our first thought was to get out our phones and look to see how far we were from the nearest gas station or store, then see if we could call for help. Unfortunately, none of us could get a decent signal. We looked at our surroundings, which were mostly woods around us, and an occasional car which drove by. The road was also really narrow. I was hoping maybe my car would start up again after a while, so we sat there waiting to start it again. And as we did, we talked about what we should do. We were debating our options when a car came slowly driving down the street and then stopped on the side of the road in front of us. The car was an older, weird-looking van. When it came to a stop, the driver got out and seemed even creepier than the van he drove. He had long hair and he wore a hat. He was also wearing sunglasses and had older clothes on and was smoking a cigarette in his mouth. He approached us and told us he would like to give us a ride. I told him we didn't need a ride and we were just waiting for our roadside service. The man laughed in a really creepy way and then told us it would be better if we got a ride from him. He then told us how he drove these mountains every day and he knew them like the back of his hand. We told him we would be fine, but thanks anyways. He then started laughing again and slowly walked back to his van and got inside. Then he drove away really slow. We were all glad to see him leave because he really gave us the creeps. We sat in the car and kept trying to get signals on our phone. Sometimes we would have one bar and it would sort of work, but then it would cut out from having signal. About 5 minutes later, we were all in the car when we noticed the van slowly coming back around the corner. It was driving at an extremely slow pace. The van was now coming back from the direction it had left, and we saw that the man's driver's window was rolled down and he had his head sticking out the window now. I heard Daniel say, "Oh no, he's back." The man was driving literally 5 miles per hour, and as he got slowly closer to us, Joey asked what the man was holding. I looked over and saw that the man had what appeared to be a gun in his hand. We all started to freak out knowing he was driving towards us, and we all feared the worst. I took the keys and desperately tried to start my car one more time. To my surprise, luckily the car started up just as the man had gotten his van about 50 feet from us. From there, I put the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas and we sped down the road. As we passed the man in his van, we heard him yell something. The man looked to try to make a U-turn on the road, but was unable to make it without having to back up due to the narrow roads. I sped away as fast as I could and took the very first exit. We stopped at the first gas station we were able to find, and luckily the man didn't follow us there. I don't think he knew which direction we went. I was able to get some help for my car and fix it, and then we continued our drive and made it safely to our hotel. The rest of the trip went fine, and my car never broke down again. was in college, I went on a spring break trip with a few of my girlfriends. This was a few years ago now, and I was a senior at the time. We went down to California for a few days, and mainly went to the beach and to local places. We also went to a few parties because my friend Maria actually had a couple of friends in the area. Her friends went to school down there and she introduced us to them. At one of the parties we were at, it was at this house down by the beach and it was really nice. At one point, this creepy looking guy who seemed really drunk came up to me and wouldn't leave me alone, even after I made it clear to him that I didn't want to talk with him. He sort of followed me around for the rest of the night there. He didn't leave until another guy had to walk him out because he was acting so crazy. When he finally left, nobody there even seemed to know who he was. It was pretty strange, but that's not where the story ends. A couple of days later, I was on the beach nearby just relaxing when I noticed the same man at a far distance away just staring at me. He was well over 100 feet away, but I could still tell that it was definitely him, and it really creeped me out when I saw him. I suddenly didn't feel so comfortable on that beach. There were not a whole lot of other people around at the time, and I decided I'd go back to the hotel that we were staying at. The next day, which was our second to last stay there, we were in our hotel when there was a knock at the door. Maria answered it and told me that there was someone there to see me. When I went to the door, I immediately saw the same guy and slammed the door shut in his face. I then told my friends that he was the guy who had been following me. We yelled that if he didn't leave, we would call the police, and thankfully, he walked away. But when we were leaving our hotel later that day, we all saw him standing in the lobby. We made sure that he didn't follow us, but I felt that this was now a serious problem. I didn't see him at all as we were out that night, and when we got back that night, we told someone at the front desk about our situation. They told us they would look out for the man. That was our last night in California, as we would be flying back the next day. We all took an Uber to the airport, and shortly after we got there as we were in line, I saw the man once again sitting down in the airport looking at me. I was really freaked out. I looked over my shoulder the whole rest of the day. Luckily, he wasn't on our flight, and when I got back, I never did see him again. I just worry that I'll see him again one day, or that he will stalk another person. Several years ago, as I was driving home from work one day, the rear taillight went out on my car. I drove a smaller SUV and still have it to this day, although I'm not much of a car guy. Luckily, I didn't get pulled over, and when I got home, I took out the taillight to see that the bulb was burned out. I didn't have a spare one, so the next morning, which happened to be a Saturday, I drove to a nearby auto parts store to get a new one. The store was quiet, and when I walked in, there was a man working behind the counter who waved to me and said hello. I said hi to the man and wandered around a little bit trying to find out where the bulbs were. The man must have seen how I didn't really know where they were, and he asked me what it was I was looking for. After I told him my situation, he said he would be happy to help me, and he led me to an aisle which had tons of different light bulbs for cars. He told me the options that I had to choose from. After he showed me a few of them, he then went back to the other end of the store behind the counter. I looked around for several minutes, comparing a few types of which ones I thought I would get for my car. Finally decided on one, then I started to walk out of the aisle. But when I did, I noticed the man was no longer behind the counter. I was looking towards the front of the store, realizing this, when suddenly I felt something hit me from behind. It was a small package of a random car part. I looked behind me to the direction that it had been tossed from. I saw nothing at first, but then from the far end of the aisle that I was in, I saw the same man who had been working there and I had spoken to. He was peeking out from behind the other side. He had a creepy grin on his face and then opened his mouth widely. His smile then suddenly disappeared and he sprinted away. I was so confused. I thought it was a joke at first, but he was acting so different than he had been before. He had been friendly and helping me out, and now he seemed almost insane. I then heard a loud noise followed by laughter coming from the next aisle over. The man then shouted at me that he would leave the store if he was me. I asked the man what was going on, but he didn't answer me. I no longer thought he was joking, and I was legitimately freaked out. I decided that it would be best if I just left. That guy seemed to be the only person who was working there at the time, and I was the only one shopping. I then heard a loud crashing sound coming from the aisle next to me again, and I heard the man start to run. I left the light bulbs there for my car and walked faster to the front end of the store. When I got there, I looked behind me to see the man sprinting towards me, and I quickly left and got into my car. He didn't follow me outside. I drove to another auto parts store and got the part for my car there. I never went back to that store, and always wondered what the man was doing. This happened roughly 5 years ago when I took my car to be repaired at a mechanic's shop nearby my house. My car had been having problems starting for a while, and it was sort of a beater, but I loved it because I had had it since my senior year of high school. I took it to the shop and left it overnight. The next morning, my friend dropped me off at the shop and I picked up my car. I didn't really know much about cars, but I talked with the mechanic for a couple of minutes and pretended like I did. He explained to me what was wrong with my car and what they did to fix it. I was just happy that it was working again, and it didn't cost me a fortune. I drove back, and the car was running just fine until literally the next day. As I was driving down the road at night, suddenly the radio in the car turned on out of nowhere. Now, this had never happened before, and I was confused, but I brushed it off as it didn't seem all too strange. A couple of days later, though, as I was driving once again, out of nowhere the windshield wipers on the car turned on. Now, I know I hadn't bumped them on accident like I sometimes would. Things were just seeming strange in the car overall. I thought maybe some sort of electrical connection to the car had been messed up when it was worked on or something. I didn't really want to take the car back though, and hoped that the problem would just go away on its own. Everything was back to normal for the most part after that though, for about a week. But then, as I was driving the car once again at night, the radio suddenly turned on. This time, it started changing the stations on its own. After that, all of the electronics in the car were going haywire for a good 15 seconds, and then finally stopped. I then heard on the radio a voice come over which sounded like it was a recording of somebody on the phone. The voice started to seemingly speak gibberish, but in a very deep voice. I was completely creeped out of my mind. This continued the entire 5 minutes or so until I got home. I got out of the car and called my friend. We talked for a while, and he tried to convince me that the people at the mechanic shop somehow messed up my car. I really didn't want to drive my car anymore though. I ended up putting it up for sale after that and sold it a short time later. I don't know what the deal was, but I'm glad I have another car now. Two years ago, I had a problem with the tires of my car. My car was fairly new and reliable, but over time the tires started to get a ton of wear on them, and I found out that I needed them replaced. One day when I was out, I happened to be shopping at the Walmart near my house. I was in sort of the corner of the store, and I noticed that they had an auto center there. The auto center was at the very far back corner, and I had never really noticed it before, but I decided to give it a look and see how much their tires were and what kinds they had. As I walked into the area, I could see that nobody else was really over there. I walked over to the desk that they had to see if anybody was working there that I could talk to. There was nobody there though, and when I looked around the auto center, it didn't really look like it was used much anymore and seemed pretty outdated. After a minute or so, I decided to just look at the tire information that they did have and then just leave. The next day, however, as I got home from work and got my mail, I saw that in my mail there was a postcard from the Walmart Auto Center. It was basically just an advertisement to go, and I found it a funny coincidence how I had just been there the day before. But the next day, I got the same thing in the mail once again. It was the exact same postcard, and now it went from a funny coincidence to a bit strange. I took it inside and threw it away. The very next day, I got one again, and the day after that, and the day after that. I was getting the same exact flyer from the Walmart Auto Center every single day as part of my mail. I decided that this was fishy enough, so I drove back to the same Walmart to try to see what was going on. I took a handful of the flyers that I received and went to the same auto department that I had been to before. This time, there was actually someone working there. A man was behind the counter, and I showed him the flyers and told him my situation. He looked at them and said that he didn't know why I kept getting them, and basically didn't have an explanation for me. However, he pointed out to me that none of the postcards had actually been addressed to me, and showed me a large stack of them that they had near the counter. When I saw this, it made me realize that whoever was giving me these postcards was not actually sending them to me, but physically putting them in my mailbox every day. I went back home after that, and decided I would try to keep a lookout of my mailbox to see who was doing this. The first 2 days, I once again got more flyers, but failed to see who did it. But the next morning, I was up early at about 6 a.m. It was before the sun had risen, and I just happened to be looking out of my window. When I did, I saw a man slowly walking down the side of the street. My eyes locked onto him when I noticed him walking closer to my mailbox. Then, I saw him reach into the pocket of his jacket and place something in my mailbox. I had finally seen who did it, but right after he did, I noticed him look to my window and then look directly at me. I didn't know what to do when I saw this, but before I could think of anything, the man started sprinting up my yard and towards my house. He ran all the way to the front door and tried to open it. Luckily, it was locked, and I watched him run away. I thought he was leaving, but a couple of moments later, I heard the sound of the back door to my house trying to be opened. That's when I decided to call the police. Clearly, somebody was trying to break into my house. When I had called 911, I told them what was going on and started to walk into my bedroom. But as I was on my way there, and literally right after I hung up the phone, I heard the sound of glass breaking. That's when I decided to run into my bathroom instead and lock the door. I didn't hear any noises though after the breaking of glass. I was thinking maybe the man never did enter my house and had just left. I waited and waited in my bathroom for what felt like forever, not hearing anything and waiting for the police to arrive. I couldn't take it anymore, and I finally decided to leave the bathroom and walk out. But as soon as I did, I saw the man standing inside my house about 10 feet away from me, smiling. It was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. The man was wearing a jacket with the hood up, and I couldn't really tell much details of his face, other than he looked like a pretty average guy. I ran back inside the bathroom and locked the door quickly. Thankfully, at around the same time, I started to hear the sirens. The man never did try to enter the bathroom, and the police showed up only to find the man completely gone. They looked around my property and neighborhood, but never found him. After that, I never got anything else strange in the mail, and I never saw the man again, but sometimes I worry he will return. I also wonder what he was doing, if he had seen me at the Walmart and decided to randomly stalk me or what, but I'm glad I've never seen him again. This story took place 2 summers ago. I'm a female for reference and was 20 years old and in college at the time. During summers, I would live at home with my parents, and during the school year, I would live at my college, which was about 3 hours away. Over the course of the school year, I never really did any maintenance to my car, and once summertime came, it wasn't running very well. It was sort of an old car that I had saved up to buy during high school, so it was never really that great of a car to begin with. But when I got back from college and my dad looked at my car, he told me I needed to take it to the mechanic to get a few things fixed. He told me he had an old friend who was a mechanic and he would work on the cars for super cheap, so we decided to take my car there. My dad hadn't talked to the guy for several years, but was hoping he would still fix the car for cheap. We drove over to him, and when we got to his shop, he said he would fix the car by the next few days and would only charge $200 for it. Now $200 is still a lot of money, but apparently it would cost about $500 to $600 at a normal mechanic's shop. The guy was sort of old, and I guess he was semi-retired, which allowed him to sort of work on cars whenever he felt like it. He was a really friendly guy, and talked to us for quite a while, asking me lots of questions about myself, and talking to my dad as well before we went back home. A couple of days later, my dad got a call from the guy saying that the car was done. The next morning, my dad dropped me off at the guy's shop on his way to work. I paid him and then got my keys. Everything was fine until the man started asking me a lot more questions about myself. He seemed like he really wanted to talk to me, and at first I thought he was just a really friendly guy who liked to talk a lot, but the questions he was asking me were starting to make me uncomfortable. He was asking me things like what I was going to do that day, where I was going, if I had a boyfriend, and if I found him to be a good-looking guy. It was just seeming creepier and creepier, and eventually I told the guy I really had to get home. He then said he should follow me home because a part that he installed on the car was really difficult and he wanted to make sure it didn't break. Now, obviously I saw right through this lie because it just really didn't make any sense and it seemed like just an excuse for him to follow me home. I told him no, it would be fine, but he insisted. I didn't know what else to do, so I just said fine and then got in my car and started to drive home. However, when I was about halfway home, I got an idea. I decided to drive to my friend Rachel's house instead because I knew I could park in her driveway and even go to her house and it wouldn't be weird. I also wouldn't be alone there like I would at my house with both of my parents at work. I made the decision to go there because I really didn't want this creepy guy to know where I lived. I arrived at Rachel's house and then parked. I saw the man in his truck behind me the whole time, and after I got out of the car, he waved at me and drove away. I was very happy to see him leave, and I then texted Rachel, who came out and talked to me for a while. I then felt bad, realizing the man could potentially return to Rachel's house later on if he wanted. I told her to call me if she saw him again, and then I went home. Once I was there, I called my dad and told him how the guy was being really creepy. My dad became furious and told me he was going to call the guy right away. This made me feel a lot better, and after that, I felt like the situation had been taken care of. My dad told my mom and I later that night that he called the guy, and after my dad accused him of being a creep, the guy hung up on him and blocked his number. Later on that night, as I was in bed watching TV in my room, I noticed a truck driving down the street, and immediately my heart sank when I saw the shape of the truck. It looked just like the old truck that the guy drove. The truck slowed down and stopped on the side of the road in front of our house. Then, I saw the same man get out. I was surprised that he knew where I lived after I drove to my friend's house. I immediately ran out of my room to the living room where my parents were. I told them what was going on, and my dad ran out of the house. We watched from the window as the guy ran back into his truck and just barely made it in and drove away before my dad got to him. We called the police, and luckily we knew who the guy was and where he worked. Unfortunately, though, we couldn't really prove anything against him that he did anything wrong other than trespassing in our yard. However, after that, we never saw him again. Like most people, I've been to McDonald's many times. I try to avoid eating fast food and stick to a healthy diet, but more often than not, I find myself really hungry and tired after work late at night, and there's always a McDonald's nearby. Plus, I love their French fries. One night, about a year ago, I had just finished another long shift at work, and by the time I was done, it was just after 11 o'clock. At this hour, there weren't many options, and as I was driving, I saw a McDonald's sign on the side of the road. I had planned to make some food at home, but about halfway through the drive, I realized how hungry I was, so that's when I decided to stop. I pulled off on the next exit and went into the parking lot of McDonald's. This was a McDonald's that I hadn't been to before. There was one close to where I worked and another near where I lived, but this one was kind of in a middle distance between the two. After I got into the parking lot, I pulled around to the drive-thru. When I got closer, I realized that no other cars were in the drive-thru at all. I was happy about this because I wouldn't have to wait long, but when I got to the speaker of the drive-thru, I noticed there was a piece of paper taped to it. It said the drive-thru was out of order and you had to go inside. I was a little disappointed, but decided that I would go inside. I saw a couple of other cars in the parking lot and parked my car, then got out to walk in. As I got to the door, I went to open it, but it was locked. At around the same time I realized it was locked, I heard some noises from nearby. I looked in the direction of the noise and saw a bush on the side of the building move and a man walk out from behind it. Then I saw another man emerge from behind another bush. I started to back away, and one of the men yelled at me to stay where I was. I turned and ran back to my car out of an instinct, but as I was running, I felt myself being grabbed from behind by the shoulder. I fell over, and as I did, whoever was chasing me fell too. As we both fell to the ground, he lost grip of me for a second, and I got up and got to my car. From there, I quickly went inside and locked the door. The man got up and ran to try to get in, and I saw the other man ran to another car that was parked nearby in the parking lot. What happened next surprised me. The man who had gotten inside the car put it in reverse and then sped over to my car and rammed into the back of it. The collision moved my car a little and damaged the back quite a bit. As the other man banged on my window, I put it into drive and ran over the curb and up into the grass. Luckily, I did drive an SUV, which had four-wheel drive, so I knew it was capable of this, and the men appeared to only have standard cars. The other man ran back to another car and got inside of it, as the man who had rammed into the back of me with his car started to drive up the curb behind me. I frantically drove out of the parking lot and onto the road. Once I had made it on, I dialed 911, and as I was out of breath, tried my best to describe the situation. The men in their cars were not able to drive up the curb as easily as me, which gave me some space. I made sharp turns at every opportunity until I was sure they weren't following me anymore. I ended up being pulled over by a police officer who heard about what had happened and saw my damaged car. I got a ride home and told him the whole story. I also had to have my car towed to a shop. And looking back, I don't know what happened to those men, but they had to be completely insane to try to attack me like that. My car ended up being totaled, and I got another one, but I haven't been back to that McDonald's location since. This happened last year when I went to a McDonald's in California. I was hungry and stopped to get a Big Mac and fries. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and the place was surprisingly quiet. When I entered the McDonald's, I saw that it had an electronic touchscreen where you could place an order, so I walked over to one and tapped it to start. I began looking through the menu for the items that I wanted. I got them and looked around for a minute or two to see if there was anything else that I wanted. All of a sudden, the screen went black for a second, and then came back. When it came back, there was a line on the screen as if it was damaged or cracked. I thought this was strange, but overall, it seemed to still be working. I continued, until only a few seconds later, it went black again. This time, a message in creepy font appeared on the screen. It said, "You're in trouble." I was totally freaked out, and a sudden bad feeling came over me. The screen once again went black, and then returned to its normal state. I didn't really care to keep ordering, and decided to just cancel my order and leave. I got food somewhere else that night, but a few weeks later, I found myself in the same area, but this time it was during the day. I was feeling brave, and I went back to the same McDonald's location, sort of out of curiosity. I walked inside, but noticed right away that the touchscreens for ordering were no longer there. I then walked to the counter where someone asked me if I would like to order. I asked the person working behind the counter what happened to the touchscreen ordering. The man working told me that they did not have it at this location. I told him I had been there a few weeks earlier and I had used it. The man responded by saying that they had never had touchscreens at this location. I couldn't believe it. I knew for a fact this was the same location that I had been to. I left wondering what exactly had happened the last time I had been there. I'm a female, and I worked at McDonald's during my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college. This story took place my first year working there, only a few days onto the job. It was my first job I ever had, and I remember one time I was working on a busy weeknight. When things finally got quiet, I was asked to go mop the floors. I mopped around the front of the restaurant and then made my way to the back. When I got towards the back and was almost done, I noticed there was one man who was sitting in the back corner of the restaurant. As I mopped sort of near him, he said hi to me. I said hi, and the man then asked me what time I got off of work that night. I told the man I was getting off pretty soon, and then went back to mopping. He asked me what I was doing after work, and I responded that I was going to my friend's house, which happened to be a lie, but this guy was kind of creeping me out, so I made something up. I could feel the man just watching me as I did, and he was just constantly watching me for several minutes after that. It was really starting to creep me out. I was finally done mopping, and shortly after that I could go home. I left the restaurant and noticed that the man was still sitting in the corner as I did. I was relieved that he didn't try to follow me out or anything like that. I went home and got ready for bed as it was a school night and about 10 p.m. I got into bed and started watching some shows on the TV in my bedroom. I would say about an hour or so later, I was beginning to get really sleepy and turned off my light. When my light got turned off, it revealed that on the other side of my bedroom window, there was a shadow. I had a shade covering the window, but if it was dark out, you could sort of see shadows on the other side of it. Usually, there was the shadow of a tree that was on the side of the window, and a bush on the other one. But now, there was a large shadow right smack in the middle, and it appeared to be a person. I got a bad feeling immediately, and slowly pushed the shades down a little bit. All I needed was about 1 inch of space to see that there was a man right outside of my window. I jumped back and screamed as loud as I could. I could see the shadow moving, and a couple of seconds later my parents came running into the room. I was freaking out, but once my parents understood, my dad ran outside. Unfortunately, the man was long gone by the time he got out there, and he didn't see any sign of him. When he came back inside, my mom had already called the police, and I told them all about the creepy guy at McDonald's. After the police came and we spoke with them, we went to the McDonald's the next day. Luckily, I never saw the man again. I almost quit McDonald's after that, but decided to stick with it and worked there for 2 years. That remains the scariest story I have from my time working there. I used to work at McDonald's. From the time that I was 16 to the time that I was 20, I worked there part-time. It's crazy to look back on it and think that I really worked there for almost 5 years. It was a really good job though, and I didn't mind it, as I'm good at talking to people and being around customers. I have a lot of memories working there, but I have one that sticks out more than the rest. It happened during my last year of working there, and was actually one of my last months having that job as well. I was working a closing shift, and after we were done working, I cleaned with my coworker Alex, and then we both left. By this time, it was a little while after midnight, and we locked up the place and both got into our cars in the parking lot. As we were leaving, we noticed a man walking through the parking lot. The guy looked pretty average and asked if we were still open. I told him no, sorry, but we just closed a little while ago. The guy seemed disappointed and then asked us if we could give him a ride home. Obviously, this struck us both as strange, and we said no to the man. The man then walked away past us into another area of the parking lot. There were a few other businesses, which had parking lots sort of connected with ours, so it wasn't all that odd for someone to walk through it, and we both went on with our nights. I went to my car and got inside, then checked my phone as I typically did after work. I waved bye to Alex as he drove away, and then I replied to a couple of texts. After I was done, I put my phone away and then put my car into reverse. But as I was just about to back up, I noticed something in my rearview mirror and I just about had a heart attack. The man who had talked to us in the parking lot earlier was now standing directly behind my car, staring right at me. He had a smile on his face and we made eye contact. When we did, he waved. I couldn't back up or else I would hit him. He then proceeded to get on the rear of my car and sit there, and then pressed his hands and face up against the back of my car window. I was really freaked out. I rolled down my window just a crack and asked the man if he could get off of my car so I could leave. The man responded by laughing loudly. He then got up and kicked at my rear window. I yelled that if he didn't leave, I would call the police. The man responded by running to my rear driver's side door and trying to open it. Once this happened, I quickly backed out, careful not to hit the man, and drove away. I was able to make it home and was just happy I got away from the guy. I texted Alex about the situation, and we agreed that the next time we closed together, we would leave at the same time so something like this didn't happen again.